That is not what we wanted. That's not what we expected, but that's what we got. 52-24 in the national championship game in Miami. This is Ohio State Buckeyes live for an 88th time. Kevin Noon on top there from Buckeye Grove on Rivals, and Steve Hellwagon, 247 Sports, Bucknuts. Aside from the ball game, how you guys doing?
Oh, great.
Yeah, just trying to unpack, literally my baggage and my mind and make the transition into 2021 and everything else and going from there, I guess.
Yeah, I said when we were putting this together a few minutes ago how this is one of the 2 or 3 most depressing days of the year because you're left looking at this entire calendar of 2021 and they don't play football until September or late August, whatever date that is for the scheduled game on that Thursday night at Minnesota is when they're going to open up. And, I think about it in those terms. And then the other thought I think about is it's January the 13th, and they'll probably be doing spring football like March 5th, which is only 6 or 7 weeks away. So we're really not that far away from when we'll have football and basketball going again at the same time here in a few weeks. But for now, it's just reverting mostly to basketball stuff for me. And, I know in the past I've come out of after these bowl games, win or lose or loss, primarily with just a state of depression at this time of the year, just kind of like, what you work 70-hour weeks, all those weeks in a row, getting ready for all these different games and all these different things that are going on. And now you're kind of left looking at the four walls, kind of like, well, what do we talk about today? So I'm sure this week, at least, we got plenty to talk about with the game on Monday, but we as we like to say, we face an uncertain future.
Yeah.
Steve, if I know you, the next thing that's going to brighten your spirits is pitchers and catchers reporting.
Well, yeah,
Kevin as well.
Yeah, another month or so.
Yeah, but he's a Reds fan, so it can't be that exciting.
Yeah, and after their 1 year of making the playoffs in the last 10 or 15, they're going to dump salary this year. So whatever. You'll notice the American flag, I'm not in my normal position because I was in Florida for 3 days. My wife has a broken ankle. I was told under no uncertain terms was I to come to our house until 4 or 5 days had passed to make sure I didn't have the virus and didn't give a woman with a broken ankle who can't walk around COVID, where she'd have to be hospitalized with a broken ankle potentially. So she would consider that, the worst of the worst. So that's why I'm in a little bit different situation here today. I'm visiting my son on the campus, outside the campus of Ohio State.
Those are the kind of considerations we have to make these days. It's not bad enough that somebody breaks an ankle, but that is to be taken into consideration. Well, good for you, Steve, because we honor the flag here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So you're in a good place there. Yep. Tony, you have just missed in 88 episodes the most depressing open to this show we've ever done by far. We're not just lamenting the game on Monday night. It's gone into the weather doldrums of January, February, into the sports calendar, and just, I don't know that Steve gave us any hope.
Well, the good thing for Steve, he being a Reds fan, and Kevin, this is when Reds fans can get excited. So let them have this. And then May, then the season is over. Thank you for that, Mark. It's like we almost planned that. The great thing about college football, even in a couple of days after an Ohio State loss when people are depressed, is it's a year-round thing, and there's always something to talk about. There's always something to look forward to. You got recruiting. This is going to be the craziest offseason in college football history with the transfer portal. And one of the concerns that we could probably talk about many, many times between now and the spring or whatever is the transfer portal being a place where everybody thinks there's an answer. And then when they get there, they find out that rosters are full and they can't go anywhere. Right. So even though there are expanded rosters, it's only expanded for the players currently on rosters, not necessarily for those who are looking to jump on, because my understanding, the limit is still 85. And yes, rosters will go over that, but you can't bring, it's like a salary cap. You can't add money to it. You can't bring players onto a roster that is full. So that's something to keep an eye out. And Ohio State will be looking certainly for people from the transfer portal.
right? It's like you're grandfathered at 85. I mean, 85, and anybody that you have that pushes over from coming back with extra year is fine, but you can't be already sitting there and go out and pick up a couple players and go over. So, yeah, my fears are the same as Tony's in terms of their guys getting that third uncle talking to them, saying, "Go look for something else." And we see guys undergrad or like underclassmen. It's been a long trip. Underclassmen going out to the damn draft, not getting drafted and having nowhere to go. Well, now we're going to have guys that are going to be doing that, going out to the transfer, won't have a place to land. What happens to them? Do they move down to D2, D3? I think the NC2A is really going to have to fix this whole situation, because it's going to. If you're trying to protect the student athlete, they're putting a lot of student athletes at risk. It's not going to hurt the Trey Sermon. It's not going to hurt the Justin Field. It's going to hurt the guy that you've never heard of that, couldn't really find a field at no name state somewhere, who's not going to find a landing spot.
We said hello to Kevin and Steve. We got Tony Gerdeman, of course, on the line as well from Buckeye Scoop. There you go. I do that every time as well, Steve. I can never get that straight in pointing in this video world here. But we will take the comments and questions, but I think we've got plenty to unpack in this one. And we'll start, we'll keep going around the circle there to Kevin. Ryan Day, Philadelphia Eagles. I didn't know that we'd be talking NFL football here today, but I shouldn't be surprised, because the guy can coach, and NFL teams need head coaches, especially at the top of that draft board, Kevin.
I mean, he's been, they tried to link him briefly to the Jags as a potential secondary candidate to Urban Meyer's. Urban Meyer, I should just probably jump off this show. I obviously haven't gotten enough sleep. I read.
Standards not extremely high, Kevin, if you haven't noticed. So you're still well within the quota.
I'm having a go today. I ran to Chipotle. They screwed up my order. I had to run back again. It's all out of whack. I've heard the name, mentioned there or whatnot. I mean, obviously he did coach at the Eagles. Then again, he's also probably seen how the hot dogs have been made over there. And again, different GMs, things are going to be different, but I don't know. I haven't given the story a second of thought, because it just kind of seems pretty far-fetched to me at this point. I'm never going to say never when it comes to anybody in the world of coaching, but we sit there and we talk about these athletes coming back, wanting another crack at a situation after a disappointing end. I would be extremely disappointed if Ryan Day jumped at this point, just, as going through a season like this one, coming all the way up to the summit of the mountaintop and not being able to plant your flag. I really don't think there's much to it. I mean, the Eagles can pursue, they can dangle money. Gene better get his checkbook out, because Ryan has earned it. He needs to be amongst the top paid coaches out there, have the money there for staff and everything else. But, I don't think we're going to be talking about it very long. I think that the Eagles are going to be told to keep looking.
We don't need to settle on the subject unless Steve, Tony, if you guys have anything on it.
I would just say I find that to be highly unlikely that he would head to the NFL after just 2 years as a college head coach. I think he and his wife, with younger kids, are enjoying living in the Columbus and Central Ohio area. I mean, he's had unbridled success really to this point, as good a first 25 games as anybody really other than Urban Meyer. So I think it would be hard for me to imagine him doing that. But again, stranger things have happened. I can't even comprehend who would be next at Ohio State if he were to leave. I don't have anybody really in mind. And I figured he would be at Ohio State for 5 or 10 years before maybe making that jump. So still early 40s, still in the prime of his coaching career. So I think he's got a lot to do still here at Ohio State, and has recruited extremely well in the 2020, 2021, 2022 cycles, to where this run, they're still the best program in the Big Ten by 2 touchdowns over most schools and 5 over a lot of them. So I think that he's got a lot more to accomplish at Ohio State.
Yeah, that's where I am. It's been a decade since he's been anywhere more than a couple of years, and That was one of the reasons they decided to come to Ohio State and stay at Ohio State. And it would be so odd to see them go through this year with all that it took just to get, Ryan Day worked really, really hard to make the season happen, talking to coaches, calling, anybody that would listen. And then to just be like, it's now I could see it being something where it's like, I don't ever want to do it again. So I'm going to head to the NFL. However, I don't expect this to ever happen again. It's, the 100-year pandemics happen every 100 years or so. So I don't think he's going to be at Ohio State that long. So he probably won't have to worry about the 21-12, pandemic or whatever that'll be coming. But it would be a surprising disappointment if after 2 years he goes and does. I mean, he's been in the NFL. He said he wanted to come back to college. So that's why, like Kevin said, I haven't given it a moment's thought. I'm not going to write about it. There's nothing to write about until I actually hear something that isn't just speculation.
We talk Ohio State football every week. Want to remind everyone out there that this is tremendous insight from these three that bring, I wouldn't even want to try to add up the years of experience here between these three. We got Steve, Kevin, and Tony on the line each and every week. So your individual contributions are certainly welcome and appreciated. And also, if you've got connections to a possible sponsorship, let us know, and you can let us know by contacting me at MarkRogersTV@gmail. Before we get to the questions led off by Roberto, I'd like to get the big picture view from everybody. We'll stay with you, Tony, in regards to what you saw on Monday night and how meaningful it is going forward and whatever stood out to you.
What stood out to me is Steve Sarkisian. You know how we talk about Brent Venables stealing signs from trying to steal signs from everybody. Sarkisian, I don't think he had to steal signs. He just knew what was going to happen from Ohio State and called every single play that would work in his favor against everything that Ohio State did. But then also, do you really have to be such a wizard if it's so easy to match up Devontae Smith against Tough Borland and Ohio State's defense, or when you're playing four linebackers against Alabama's spread offense? And I think, completely hindsight, but I said it at the time that it would be better to force Alabama to run than to throw with their Devontae Smith and John Mechie, and because as good as those guys are, they spread Ohio State's defense out, took advantage of it. And I don't know if this is a testament of how little faith Ohio State had in their secondary to actually take one guy out of there, or two guys by not going with a nickel at least much of the time against what they were doing. And so there's going to have to be some fixes there in terms of development, numbers. We know they had Cam Brown lost him at the start of the season, and they've had some recruiting misses. And so it was not a great situation, not a great matchup for the Ohio State defense. But again, without nothing they did would have been a good matchup against Alabama, because the way Alabama targeted Devontae Smith, it's like they knew Ohio State wasn't going to have an answer. And so it was easy for them. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing is how easy it was.
I'll jump. Let Steve.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going.
Go ahead.
Kevin.
The situation was that, Ohio State came out and played a C- game, and Alabama, I couldn't imagine they could play a much better game. An A game, and it needed to kind of be the other way around. As Tony said, when we saw a scheme that had Tough Borland trailing Devontae Smith, we knew that was going to be a bad situation. They lose Trey Sermon on the first series of the game, and while maybe that's not 100% an equivalent to Ohio State losing Ted Ginn against Florida in 2006, it certainly didn't help when you come right out and you try to use Sermon at the beginning of the game and you lose him. It wasn't a good situation. You can play what if. What if Ohio State does score on its first series and doesn't have a 3-and-out? What if, they do have Sermon? What happens if we go 7-all, 14-all, which we did, but 21-all? Ohio State keeps up the pace with with Alabama at that point. I mean, and then it just comes down to being able to service breaks, and they just never were able really to do it. They ended 2 Alabama series without points in the first half. One of them being the Baron Browning forced fumble and recovery, and then just another one. It was a tough situation, and I think it really means that Ohio State needs to do kind of a self-evaluation on a lot of things going into this offseason. You know, we can talk about how early enrollees into the NFL, early departures into the NFL kind of cost them, losing a couple of defensive backs who were booted out of school due to some legal issues and maybe some recruiting misses along the way didn't really bode well for them, plus the injury to Cam Brown. But, yeah, I think there were certainly some deficiencies in terms of the personnel that they were able to trot out there for all 84 offensive plays that Alabama ran. But, you know, at the end of the day, Sarkisian just kind of put on a masterclass with what he called, and Ohio State really could not make any adjustments that were going to work. You know, some great quotes from Najee Harris after the game about how Ohio State came out there and he was hurting after the game, and how, you know, they held him to 3 yards a carry or something along those lines. But, you know, when Alabama came out and said we're playing an A game and was able to execute, you know, it was going to be a tall task.
Yeah, I would agree with everything these guys said. I think that Ohio State needed Alabama to turn it over a few times and make some mistakes to kind of help them. But in the end, it was proven Alabama has better players and they had a better scheme. And I don't think there was any doubt about that. I think Ohio State's offense, Justin Fields to me didn't seem like he was 100%. He was missing some easy throws. His guys dropped some catchable balls on him that really hurt. And, man, you take Trey Sermon out of there, and the threat of running the football is gone now, basically, because Master Teague's not a home run hitter. I don't think Master Teague was 100% coming back from a concussion, probably hadn't practiced a whole lot. So you had it all together. I mean, he had one good run out of 15, I think. The others were just kind of meh. Had a couple short touchdown runs where he bulled through some guys, which were important. But, you know, he didn't make the difference in this game like Trey Sermon. Had he run as he had the 2 previous games, certainly would have. So you had it all together. It was a perfect storm. Everything went Alabama. Everything that could go Alabama's way went Alabama's way. There was no controversy involved in this, other than the over/under was 75 or 76, and it was right at 76. And they took away 2 apparent Ohio State touchdowns, one to Smith-Njigba and the other one to Olave. To me, the only thing I come out of this game thinking about is, on this going out of bounds, getting a foot down, juggling the ball thing, I consider this to be juggling the ball. I don't consider this to be juggling. When you've got 2 hands on the damn thing and you're moving it around in your hands, I don't consider that to be juggling the ball. Both of those should have been touchdowns.
The Olave one, especially, that they didn't even look at it, and they called a timeout to get them to look at it, and they wouldn't. And we've seen that throughout the year. The replay officials just, I don't know, we don't work the second and the fourth quarter. They've been terrible this year on even reviewing plays. And then to not even look at that one, when, I don't know what they said on TV, but you could see clearly he got his left foot down on the stadium screen. And just to not doesn't make a difference. No, it's just the point of it. You know, it's supposed to be the best of the best, but clearly it wasn't for the replay officials. And then there was they had to call a timeout to get a fumble reviewed at one point, because they were so desperate to stop Alabama's offense that they called a review on, I think, a Billingsley possible fumble. And of course he was down, but to have to get involved that way when every play is supposed to be reviewed, and they're asleep at the switch for much of the time, it's disappointing, but certainly not as disappointing as the Ohio State defense.
Yeah, it was the crew. I mean, I was familiar with the crew. I was. You shouldn't really know the names of the replay officials. It was actually a pretty decent replay official, one that I was aware of. But I was I was not understanding why they wouldn't look at it, but you get a challenge. I don't know why. You've already burned the timeout. Why don't you sit there and challenge at that point? If you're wrong, you lose the challenge. But I mean, the touchdown we're talking about in the back of the end zone, I mean, it was just to try and maybe shrink the margin of defeat a little bit. It doesn't really matter at that point. Burn the challenge at that point. Force them to look at it, and then if they sit there and they still rule against you, at least one, you hear their thinking, and two, if it's just a ludicrous explanation, that's just more ammunition for what's wrong with the replay system. But yeah, does it mean anything in the grand scheme of things? No, it didn't mean anything in terms of the outcome of the game. It didn't mean anything really for people who were watching a certain number, if you know what I mean, in Vegas. It didn't mean anything there either, but it would have been nice. It would have been a moment to sit there and have that. It would have been nice for Fields' line, which was pretty mediocre for Fields standards, but it is what it is.
Yeah, the only thing that matters is who won the game. It's a national championship game, but yeah, for the points that Tony in particular made, this is a national championship game, and even if the score is 45-0 with 3 seconds left, let's get the calls right on the field. Now, so the Olave touchdown turned into a loss on downs, correct? The Jackson Smith catch at the pylon, what happened right after that? I can't remember.
It was the same series.
Same series.
Yeah. I mean, it was like 2-3 plays later, something like that.
All right. Yeah, so there you go, 52-31. The last hope I thought they had was after the Garrett Wilson catch. There was about 9 minutes left, 38-24, 2 touchdowns. Not that they were stopping anyone defensively, but you figured if something happens, they can get an onside kick. Of course, they're not going to get like 3 straight onside kicks. One, and then play some defense, get a turnover, do something. There was hope.
And the problem is having down your kickers. Drew Crispin, the punter, is now your kicker on kickoffs, and I'm sure he has very little experience kicking onside and the precise way that they want to do it. And do you still try? I think so, because Ohio State wasn't stopping Alabama from going 75 yards. Why would they stop them? What's the difference between 45 and 75? If Alabama recovers the kick and you can't stop them anyway, at least you had a chance. But I don't know that he had any experience kicking onside, and I don't know what you do there. Do you just try to hit one of the up men and then let all heck break loose because you're not expecting him to get one of those precise kicks with the on the second bounce it goes up in the air, and onside kicks are so hard to recover now anyway.
Yeah, I was just going to add quickly, they really, for safety purposes, have taken most of the opportunity to get an onside kick off the table. I mean, I don't, it's such a rare occurrence to where you can make one work. You would almost have to try something like Tony suggested of just blasting it into an up back that wouldn't probably be expecting it or whatnot, and hope to get it from there. And as Mark said, you're not going to probably be able to do that 2 or 3 times. You only fall once for the banana in the tailpipe routine.
So we got a question coming in from Roberto. So what are your thoughts about Borland, Browning, and Werner? They've been in 2 horrible defenses. 2018, he's considering 2020 to be the same. People blame scheme problems, but they still disappointed both years. Thoughts? Who wants to take that one?
You're not in a horrible defense if you're in a national championship game. So right there, I disagree with the premise. Borland, Browning, and Werner were all fine in my opinion. Pete Werner is so underrated, it's ridiculous. Baron Browning finally found a home this year on the outside. He was miscast as a middle linebacker, and he will tell you that. Tough Borland is what he is. He's the leader of the defense, calls all the plays, gets everybody lined up, and shouldn't be defending slot receivers. That's 99.9% of middle linebackers in America. And that's not Tough Borland's fault. That's the safety's fault. That's Kerry Combs' fault. That's everybody else's fault for putting him in that situation. That's Steve Sarkisian's fault. That's not his fault. No linebacker, no safety, very few corners can defend Devontae Smith. I'm not going to get upset with Tough Borland because he's one of these guys that can't do what Sean Wade and Sevyn Banks have trouble doing. That's, So I think the linebackers are very good. We'll see how things go next year because you're going to have 3 new ones, and you lose Justin Hilliard as well. You lose 4 seniors, and now you're going to be replacing them with also some rising seniors who have played here and there, but are not completely. They're relatively unproven. And I know people get, the familiarity breeds contempt, and they stopped giving Tough Borland a shot after that 2018 defense, which was bad in terms of relative to what Ohio State does in a bad scheme. And you saw what a good scheme looked like last year. And then this year, again, it's hard for me to go all judgmental this season because it was a pandemic season, and Ohio State had some secondary issues that caused problems all over the place. And secondary meaning in the defensive backfield. And linebackers were a strength of this team, and that's where I stand on it.
I'll be quick because I'm sure I cut Steve off before, but the problem wasn't necessarily with the linebackers this year. I think that the linebackers are probably the most consistent unit. I mean, I think that the secondary certainly had some issues. I think that the defensive line had issues with who it was missing, but Mac Jones was getting rid of the ball so fast. I don't know how much of a pass rush you were going to get there, but I'm not going to sit there and say that this defense was below standards just because certain players were on the field in both of those seasons. I think that the linebackers probably were more of a liability in 18 than they certainly were here in 20. So I see that as an unfair blanket statement there. I don't put it on the linebackers. I mean, there's certainly, people want to sit there and see Raekwon McMillan and some guys like that out there. They didn't have Raekwon McMillan. So it, kind of is what it is. And, I think we're all going to be seeing how, history is going to look back at what these 2020 guys really were when we get to 2021, when guys like Mitchell, Pope, Gant are going to be really in the mix. And I think they all really can be successful, but, we're not going to know until we know.
My feeling is that this Borland, Werner, Hilliard, Browning group was a good enough group. Ohio State was great against the run, and those guys were part and parcel of that. But I think you can have 2 of those guys. The third guy needs to be, as Jordan Bowman commented here, an Isaiah Simmons. If you have 2 of those guys in your 3-man linebacker core, the third guy has to be an All-American, an Isaiah Simmons. And that's what they didn't have. Somebody who could run sideline to sideline, make plays in the backfield, cover people, basically somebody who's an All-American who can do it all. If you want to win at this level, I mean, you can win the Big Ten with these guys. That's great. There's nobody in the secondary who would have started on the 2014, 15, 16, 17, maybe the 18 team. There's nobody in the secondary, not even Sean Wade, who would have started on any of those teams. So you're trying to win big, win a national championship with guys that aren't as good as, guys that you've had in those positions in the past, not even close. And, part of it's like Kevin said, you lose 2 guys who get arrested back in February, have Cam Brown go down with an injury, have guys that haven't panned out. I mean, you have one guy on this roster who was a national top 25 prospect who shall remain nameless from Jacksonville, Florida, national top 25 prospect who's barely played a handful of plays 3 years in. I mean, you've had some misses. You've had guys transfer out. You've had any number of different issues. I mean, you have to look in the eye, look the problem dead in the eye, and say there's nobody special in the back 7. And I mean, they're good. The linebackers are good cleanup players. In this game, once again, they all had 8 or 10 tackles. But you know what? None of them changed the game. Browning had a forced fumble that led to a touchdown. That is a potential game-changing play in a game that you win or that you're in position to win. But when you get your ass handed to you the other 58 and a half minutes, nobody in the back 7 was special enough to change the tide of that game. That's just the fact of the matter. And had they had Lattimore, Hooker, Denzel Ward back there, maybe the result's a little bit different. Maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe they win 50% of the time and Ohio State wins 50% of the time. In this case, Alabama won 95% of the time. And a lot of it was scheme, but in my mind, very much of this was personnel. And you didn't have national championship caliber personnel at any of the backs, not at 0 At 0 of the back 7 positions did you have national championship caliber personnel. Now, a couple of them could play on a national championship team if you have an Isaiah Simmons or a Denzel Ward or a Marshawn Lattimore or a Hooker there to cover up some deficiencies of the group. But you don't even have one of those caliber players in your back 7, not one. And Shaun Wade being an All-American, we can finally say it, ridiculous. That's just name value. That's people not even watching the games and just picking names out of a hat, because he got torched by Penn State, he got torched by Indiana, he got torched by Clemson, and he got torched here. So, I mean, I don't know. That's my rant. All very nice people. This is not an indictment of Tuff Borland or any of these people. Pete Werner, great leaders, great people. They got you to the dance, but they weren't good enough to win this dance. No way, no how. Play that game 10 times. Play that game 100 times. Ohio State might win it 3 or 4 times, and that's if they have a different scheme and they showed no depth. The same 7 guys played in the back the entire game. They didn't bring in Lathan Ransom. They didn't bring in anybody to change things up even a little bit.
And I think you made it very clear that those guys can play on championship teams, but they can't be the centerpiece, and that's what it's all about.
But they can't carry. They can be carried, but they can't carry.
You can go to any championship team in any sport on any level. You know, the Los Angeles Lakers don't need 5 LeBron James, but they need 1, and they need another superstar. You can have role players that do their job, but you can't win it that way.
You can have 7 role players in the back 7.
Yeah, P. Werner is good enough to play on a national championship team, no question.
Shaun Wade would have been the nickel back on some of them other teams.
I was playing the same game in my head, Steve, watching that game. I was going back, and I'll leave it to you guys, and Steve's partially answered this. I was going back as far as like 2012 thinking, when if they had a worse secondary than this one?
Well, 13 was awful with
they played awful, but
Pittsburgh Brown is one of your starters or whatever. I mean, that's as bad as it gets. 13 was as bad as it gets. They had young guys out there screwing around, and some of them did.
Christian Bryant, those guys weren't better, and Barnett.
Well, Roby by name. I mean, Roby went to the NFL and has had an NFL career, but Christian Bryant certainly hasn't. I don't know. I don't know. Pittsburgh Brown. That's all I have to say. Pittsburgh Brown played in front of Von Bell. That'll just tell you. And when Von Bell got in the game in the Orange Bowl, intercepted a pass on the goal line, and should have played all season and didn't.
I don't necessarily disagree. I'm just thinking about past secondaries. In 2006, they had Antonio Smith as a walk-on, but he ended up being, a Thorpe semifinalist, and he ended up playing well. But yeah,
teams didn't play like they do now back then. Though. I mean, I completely agree. It was like so rudimentary back then.
2018 with trying to figure out, is it Isaiah Pryor, is it Jocelyn Went, and when those are 2 of your 2 choices at safety, that's hard to win with. But just the injuries, the lack of numbers, the COVID this year, you couldn't get any type of symmetry, and I don't think that Marcus Williamson or Marcus Hooker are necessarily, as Steve said, those aren't guys that start and win a national championship for you this year. Maybe they do next year. They need to get better there. I think everybody needs to get better, and we'll see what Seven Banks and Cam Brown can do next year. They need Legend Cavazos and Ryan Watts, those corners to step up. And what does Cameron Martinez do? Lathan Ransom, I know people have big expectations for him, but you're talking about Isaiah Simmons. I'm thinking that sounds maybe like Court Williams. What does he become? Does he become the guy that can run around and play that? The 2022 class has they've already got commitments from guys like that who can play outside linebacker and also drift back, but that's a long way off. We'll talk about them in like 2023. But that's the frustrating thing when you're saying you need a guy like Isaiah Simmons, and yet Ohio State played 2 more linebackers than a 4-2-5, and none of them are like Isaiah Simmons. And it's just a bad matchup, and shows, as I said, how little faith they had in the secondary. And I guess hard to have faith next year with the same group. That's why you have to look outside of that, I think.
I was just going to say, you need to win your position, not get it by default. And I think there was a lot of that. I think it was just, all right, well, we've got a bunch of kids, and then we have these guys, and, well, we're going to have to go with these guys or whatever. And that's not an indictment on any of them. And anybody at Buckeye Grove knows that I'm very hesitant to sit there and, if a kid screws up, but I'm not going to jump down his throat or anything. Leave that to the posters who will do that. But I think that you're going to need to see, Cameron Martinez, Ryan Watts, Legend Cavazos all step up at corner. You're going to need to see Bryson Shaw and Lathan Ransom and Ronnie Hickman and maybe the incoming guys. I think if we have a true spring practice this year, if we have a true summer off-season workouts and we have a true fall camp, you're going to have a chance for these guys to get the instruction. I think you're going to have a chance for younger guys to step into these roles, because with the way that 2020 was set up, it really just felt that at positions where they weren't exactly sure what they were going to go to, it just went to the older guy just because they've been in the system. They are a little bit more physically developed and maybe weren't necessarily the best option.
Well, and Ryan Day said it after the game. It's nice to have ideas, but you have to be able to execute them. And really, the only ideas they could execute were the ones that we saw, and that clearly wasn't enough.
Appreciate the super chat contribution from Alalakazam. I should get my glasses, shouldn't I? Anyway, I always botch his handle till I can read it there. I feel Ohio State didn't have the same pump they did as they did against Clemson. Either way, y'all be back next year. Good luck from a Clemson fan. We appreciate the contribution. Thank you so much on that one. Man, I could take this 52 different directions, and this subject has probably passed us by in the conversation because we were kind of getting past this specific game. But, Kevin brings up some what ifs. And when you say, what if we didn't go 3-and-out the first series? So to me, that's a talent or a scheme or a play issue. That's, Rutgers could say, what if we didn't give up, 72 points today? So I don't consider that necessarily a what if, but not having Trey Sermon, Tommy Togiai, and then Wyatt Davis past halfway through the second quarter, arguably the best offensive lineman on the team. You can't make excuses for injuries. Those are part of the game. But at some point, you have to say it would have been nice to have seen what we would have had with our best offensive lineman, our best running back, and our best interior tackle, or one of two great ones.
I think what if Justin Fields comes into this game 100%? You can't sell a zone read offense if the quarterback's not going to be able to read the defensive keys and be able to go. And Justin did have some runs. I think he led the team in rushing, but it wasn't a case of where we were seeing a true zone read offense. And I see a lot of people shaking their heads with me on that one. I think that's one of the biggest things that's probably not being talked about enough. I mean, we can talk about Fields maybe not being on his passing game, but, with the whole not probably being 100%, maybe not being 75%, Ohio State once again goes into its final game of the season with a less than healthy Justin Fields, and they're not able to operate, the way that they did in all the games leading up. And I think that seriously is an issue. And as Mark said, you can't explain away or play what if, injuries or whatnot. But I mean, it's a serious thing that I'm going to look back at, and I'll probably write a piece about at some point of how things maybe could have been a little bit different if Ohio State had a more potent offense based on, 1, 2, 3, and 4 scenarios that happened, leading into or over the course of the game.
We go back to last year's Clemson game, and it's just, if one thing wouldn't have happened, if one of the a dozen different things wouldn't have happened, then Ohio State wins that game. This one, it's like if all 12 of the dozen things that happened that didn't need to happen, like if Justin Fields is healthy, if Trey Sermon is healthy, if Tommy Togiai plays, if Tyreek Smith plays, if Wyatt Davis doesn't go down, if the instant replay officials aren't taking a nap, like if they don't lose Cam Brown at the start of the season, but Alabama lost players as well. What if they didn't lose Jalen Waddle, and what if he was healthy for this game? So the ifs can go many different ways. If as Kevin said, if Devontae Smith had overslept, if he had done the AM PM on the alarm, imagine what could have happened there for Ohio State. But there are things like I don't think you should ignore them. I also just think that they didn't get to Mac Jones, and maybe Tommy Togiai and Tyreek Smith would have helped that. But that dude was, I mean, he had eyes in the back of his head on that one Baron Browning blitz when he was rolling out and turned back and flipped it to a screen to Najee Harris, and Najee Harris went for some yards and made the linebackers miss. And yeah, I think all of those ifs for Ohio State make this a closer game. But it just felt like as out talented as more talented as Ohio State was against Clemson, because I feel like Ohio State very much had more talent than Clemson. I feel like Alabama's talent overshined Ohio State similarly.
So if Alabama's a 10, Ohio State's an 8, and Clemson's a 6, was it?
Right. That's how I view it.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Urban Meyer, obviously, we can always learn a lot from him. I don't know if you guys, being at the site, had a chance to watch the Big Ten show, post-game show, but you have to kind of weed through what he has to say because it's very comes from this enormous knowledge base. But he wants to be proper in his criticism of anyone or his analysis of the game. But he was pretty forthright about safety plays, like the safeties. Just that the standard of play at the safety position is not good enough. He seemed to be pretty adamant about the talent being good enough, but he was.
Well, he recruited it. He can't throw it under the bus. He recruited
not
it
at this point. Sure, he had to wait a couple of years.
Not going to indict himself.
He certainly was very underlining his complimentary comments of the Alabama coaching. And in such a way to basically say Ohio State might have gotten out-coached.
I would agree with that. I mean, Sarkisian was a wizard in this one. And, Alabama's defense, I don't know that they out-coached Ohio State. I just think Ohio State, once they lost Trey Sermon, they lost a big part of their plan because with Justin Fields being banged up, you don't know one hit could have taken him out. So you're going to try to avoid that. And you lose Trey Sermon, then you lose Wyatt Davis. That's just Ohio State's personnel falling by the wayside as Alabama just does what they want, knowing that there's so much pressure on the Ohio State offense. The Alabama offense puts more pressure on the opposing offense than the Alabama defense, because I have to score almost every drive. And so a 3rd and 7 against Alabama's defense is a lot more difficult than a 3rd and 7 against anybody else, just because of what that 3rd and 7 means, not necessarily because of what Alabama is doing on 3rd and 7. It's like, if you don't convert this, you're going to give the ball back. And now Alabama scores again. Now you're down 14-0 instead of 7-0. And there's just creates more pressure. Like the pressure is heightened because of what Alabama's offense does. And that makes the defense even better.
So when Tony says that Ohio State's talent isn't up to Alabama's standards, I guess that's considered an excuse. I don't get when people put excuses. I
think that's the reason why they lost.
Yes,
Master Teague is not as good as Trey Sermon. Master Teague is not a national championship running back. The defense, as we saw, it's what kind of excuses would be like? Well, it was raining, or the sun got in their eyes. Excuses aren't the secondary wasn't good enough. Yeah. An excuse is not the secondary wasn't good enough. That's why you lost. They didn't defend Devontae Smith. That's not an excuse. That's a reason why they lost. That's evidence.
Right. It's easy to sit there and say Alabama was the better team that night, but that doesn't explain anything. I mean, that's not making an excuse. But and I don't think I've really heard anybody sit there and say that Ohio State pissed this game away or anything like that. I mean, Ohio State got whipped. And here's the reasons they got whipped. They didn't have the secondary play. They didn't have the threat of the zone read. The play calling ended up getting to be a little bit more, conservative and safe and predictable. Nick Saban is a wizard. I mean, we got all these things there that I think that explain it.
It's like you live next to you have farmland and you live next to the river, and then your farmland gets flooded because of a bunch of rain, and you're like, man, my farmland got flooded, and somebody's like, you're just making excuses. Like, no, I mean, this is why the crops are all gone. They all flooded and they were drowned. No, come on. Excuses.
Well, I had to remind a caller this week that it's reasonable conversation, because otherwise, if we just say 52-24, then we've got like a 13-second podcast and we're done. That's why we discuss it. And if you don't like it, then you move on to whatever other entertainment venues you like. But we're going to discuss the game. So when you bring up injuries, I think there's a balance to be struck. Is it an excuse? To a certain extent, depending on if you're going to blame them, but it's a talking point that has to be addressed. Yes, there are teams and there are units on particular teams where you can lose the number one guy at that position. The number two guy comes in and he's that much less of a talent and you don't lose much. And that's to the credit of your recruiting and your depth and your talent on the roster. And there's other spots where you don't, and that's to your discredit. But it's worth mentioning that if Togi, and Sermon and Harbaugh and Wyatt Davis are there, that it's probably a little bit different if a game. Does Ohio State win? I don't think so. Alabama's a better team. But let's talk. Alabama lost one of its safeties, Jordan Battle. I don't know his replacement off the top of my head and how quality that replacement is. They probably lost next to nothing there. And that's to their credit that they've got a replacement who's just as good, most likely.
Well, Trey Sermon came into this game with the best two-game stretch in Ohio State football history in terms of running the ball. You lose him, that's significant. It's not like he came in averaging 102 yards per game in the last two games. That's anybody. He came in averaging 262 yards per game over his last two games. You take him out, yeah, that's significant. But again, he doesn't play defense, so I don't think he's the reason Ohio State lost.
Absolutely, folks. Ohio State football talk here with Kevin Noon from Rivals Buckeye Grove, Steve Hellwagon, 247 Sports. And of course, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop. Yes, sir.
I'm just seeing Notre Dame only lost by 17. Let's put Ohio State and Notre Dame on the same field and see what happens. And you can pick which players you don't want Ohio State to have that week due to COVID.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit there and try and ruin all of Mark's Notre Dame viewership, but Ohio State would curb stomp Notre Dame. Plain and simple. Curb stomp, like horrible.
And we can say that, but we can't
score. Anytime you bring up a score and a score comparison, okay, it starts there. Sure, we can bring up the score. You start the discussion there, but let's put it into context, and let's put the rest of the season and the results into context too. You know, we were talking about the Orange Bowl, and somebody was bringing up Texas A&M and North Carolina and said Texas A&M killed North Carolina 41-27. So this person apparently didn't watch the game, number one, because North Carolina was leading in the fourth quarter. Number two, Texas A&M scored a touchdown with like 40 seconds left. They were up by one score, scored a meaningless touchdown with like 40 seconds left. North Carolina was missing two of the best running backs in the country, their best wide receiver, their best defensive player. They were missing 5 huge opt-outs aside from their quarterback, their 5 best players. Actually, I went away from that game thinking more of North Carolina than I did Texas A&M. Put it into context. What's this quarterback situation going to look like next year? I know we got 8 months to talk about it, but
I like Gunnar Hope's chances.
Yeah, he wasn't even around. He wasn't even around at the end of the year. I mean, you never saw him, so I'm going to say Stroud probably has the inside track, but watching him go out there on the field, if you put him side by side with Fields, one looks like a fully grown man and the other one looks like a high school senior. So he's going to get killed if he goes out there with that frame as he is right now. I don't know what he's probably listed the exact same thing as Fields, but he doesn't look as sturdy as Fields. And so he's got a lot of work to do. I think they all do. And the good news is they have 8-9 full months to get ready to go. I mean, I know they're not going to get back in for another week or two probably when Mick's gonna ring the dinner bell and say, okay, it's time to get back in here. But that day's coming because they don't want to lose a day. And particularly, they do a week of spring football before spring break. Now, my kids go to Ohio State. And I don't even know if there is a spring break this year because of COVID. They may have just done away with it and tried to contract things. So maybe that'll change their spring football schedule. But usually they start like the 4th or 5th of March, which is like 7 weeks from now. So, football will be back here before we know it is kind of the moral of this story. And hopefully, as you guys were alluding to earlier, they get a full spring, a full summer program where they can throw balls to one another, 4 nights a week for 10 weeks in a row or whatever, and get down that timing. You've got a guy like Olave. You don't see him really projected first round anywhere. And one of our guys had heard his dream and his goal was to be a top 15 pick and make the big money. And as of right now, he doesn't project that way. Now, maybe if he goes to the combine and shows some amazing stuff, they would move him up there. But I think that there's a 30% chance maybe he could come back, probably less than that. But the question in his mind's got to be, who's going to get me the football? And, that's a $64,000 question right now. I mean, these guys all come highly recommended, but we've never seen any of them throw a ball in a live game, and we didn't get to go to any practice. We've never seen any of them throw the ball, period, except in warm-ups. So
right.
God only knows.
I think they're back by February 1, and before you know it, it'll be that Harley Davidson day and all this other stuff. But getting, you talk about Stroud frame or whatnot, get them in a situation to where they're not all being sent home to go work out and have backpacks full of rocks and building wooden squat racks in their driveway or whatnot. Let them have the time that they're supposed to have with Mick and his staff, and those frame. And I'm probably the most out of shape on the beat, so I shouldn't be talking about any workout drills or anything like that. But I think you put them in, you put them in that type of situation. Those young players will end up being turned into hardened steel before you know it. And, I guess back to the original question, I think Stroud probably has a little bit of an edge over Jack Miller right now, but don't sleep on Kyle McCord coming in as a true freshman. It's not like Miller or Stroud really had a lot of experience in terms of real world game experience. I think Miller had 10 to 14 snaps this season on offense. I think Stroud had like 8 to 10, somewhere like that. So it's not like McCord is coming in completely, behind, other than has a year behind them in terms of being within the system, hearing this is this and that's that. But I'm going to put McCord in there as a dark horse. Yeah,
I would agree. He's coming in this winter to vie for that starting spot. I agree. I'll go with Stroud. He is listed at 6'3", 205, and as I was going to say, as Kevin said, get him in that weight room for winter. He should have been in there last year, and it was for a little bit, but you get another year in there, and I know they like him. He has the athletic ability that they also like, as we saw this season, but it's going to be interesting to watch. I personally would like to see spring football pushed back a month. There's for everybody, or whoever wants to, because really distance yourself from the winter by an extra month. Starting like the first week of March, start the first week of April. You don't have to deal with spring break, because Ohio State, the way they do it, they have practice for a week, then they go on spring break for like 2 weeks, and then they're back at it. Try to distance yourself from the cold weather a little bit, and it doesn't matter whether you end April 20th like normal or May 20th. Maybe there's some vaccination coming at that point. Just maybe things are a little bit more normal in April, May. I don't know if it will be. Being a multi-million-dollar football program, I assume all of these guys will have access to the vaccination before the normal us loser public people. So get them all vaccinated because they deserve it, because of what they've done for America. But I'd like to see spring football push back a month and then maybe try to resume some normalcy.
One last topic real quick before we run, just because a number of people had commented on, yes, Jim Harbaugh's new contract extension, however you want to phrase it. I'll give my 2 cents because it's you can find it elsewhere, is that it's incentive laden. The opening statement by Ward Manuel, the AD, was that we believe Jim is still the man to deliver championships. And if they're going to hold him to that standard, he's not going to do it, certainly with this football team that we saw this past season, despite what personnel changes are going to be made and coaching changes, new defensive coordinator coming in from the Ravens in particular. They're an 8-4 football team, in my estimation, for this season at best. And they're going to have to give him 2 or 3 years. But of course, it being incentive laden, what I'm interested in seeing is that if we get the Jim Harbaugh that showed up on campus the first time around, not in 1985, but first time around in regards to the coaching staff, we get the fiery Jim Harbaugh who's got some hunger and a fire in his belly to try to take down the Buckeyes, because we haven't seen him for a while. Any thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, Michigan couldn't find anybody better. Harbaugh couldn't find anywhere better to go. Let's just sit here and put together a deal with very little on the buyout, and we'll talk about this again in about 330 days.
It's a marriage by inconvenience at this point. It is interesting that national championship being the standard when they've won a split title in almost 75 years. So that's not a standard. That's you did this thing this one time. Georgia Tech doesn't view a national championship as their standard, I'm guessing. Neither does Colorado. Both of those teams won one split national title in the last 75 years, and maybe even more recently. I'm not up on what they have done, but what Jim Harbaugh does need is more energy, and he needs a staff with more energy, and they need to recruit the Midwest. Leave the Northeast alone. It's fine if there's 1 or 2 guys there. You don't use the Michigan brand in recruiting. It still works somehow. Go back out to California, do what you do there, and just work harder, work smarter.
Stay out of Rhode Island.
That's what I'm saying. You don't need a fence around Rhode Island. You don't need a fence around Massachusetts. The main pipeline can be shut off. It's okay. Let them go. Let Don Brown out in Arizona go and recruit Boston City Public and go from there. But just more energy is what Jim Harbaugh needs. And they need to find a quarterback that will get better as time goes on and not get worse.
We were sitting on a patio in New Orleans, and in front of about these 2 guys and about 4 or 5 others, and I just vented my spleen, and I just said, I just want to see the guy try. He doesn't even try. He has basically accepted their money for 6 years and hasn't even lifted a finger, is how it seems to me. And if this is as good as he can do and he's trying 100%, he's not the guy for the job. He's simply not the guy for the job. This is not the Jim Harbaugh who won at Stanford. This is with guys that, that couldn't play at USC, for God's sake. This is not the coach from the San Francisco 49ers who, got to the Super Bowl. No way, no how. No, I mean, come on. No way. This guy is basically taken their money on his name alone and done nothing for 6 years. That's how I put his tenure at the University of Michigan. No one has done so little for so much money, and or whatever that saying is, little with less or whatever, it applies to him. And, if he's going to be the coach there, okay, it's kind of like this contract's like, okay, you got us the first 6 years. Now you're going to go out and earn the money. And if you earn the money and put a winner on the field, okay, we'll reinstate your pay back to what it ought to be. But, come on, man. This is ridiculous.
He was like a robot in terms of just maniacal football robot. And now he became just a sad robot and a moping robot.
Moping, sad robot complaining about the calls.
Right. And
just as every other Michigan coach has done for time in memoriam. I mean, just
wealthy, sad.
but even when he started and was doing all of these satellite camps, he was still taking guys that were easy to take. and guys that never ended up being part of the program and taking commitments from guys who shouldn't be at Michigan. And so, yes, he did a lot early on.
He's always looking at the jumbotron in the end zone like, how did we get screwed on that call? You didn't.
Work more, work smarter, and become more productive, and do a better job at developing your players. It's that easy.
And as Kevin pointed out, don't go to the Northeast if you're going to ignore Vermont. In New Hampshire, certainly there's plenty of 4 and 5 stars up there.
It's easy when you're getting paid like $100,000 a day or whatever it was he was making. I mean, he was making $7 or $8 million. What does that transfer out to it per day? Like 50 grand a day or something? I mean, Jesus criminy. 25 grand a day? I mean, come on, man.
Who hates recruiting more, Jim Harbaugh, Jim Foster, or Jim O'Brien?
All the above.
All Jims.
Good stuff with these guys. Kevin Noon, Buckeye Grove. We got Steve Hellwagon, of course, Bucknuts and Buckeye Scoops. Tony Gerdeman. Guys, it's been a pleasure. Now we're off into the off season. Watch which finger we're going with.
I was like, wow, that's a hot take.
Hey,
All right,
it's only
boys,
going to get
appreciate
better. Every week we go, we're close to that Minnesota game. So here we go.
All right, guys. See you soon. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.